Hello, everyone, and welcome back to live coverage of the Vintage main event at Eternal Weekend Prague. We're currently entering round number 5, and I am here with Andreas Petersen, a very, very good Vintage player, the Vintage Magic Online champion, currently doing coverage with me. Andreas, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and as the rounds go by, even greater. I love Vintage. I love playing it. I love covering it. I love talking about it. I even think about it too much when I'm with my family and stuff. So yeah, I live and breathe Vintage.
Sounds great. We have a very exciting match for you in this round number 5 for multiple reasons. We have Stefan Schutz playing the Dimir Control, a very typical fair blue deck for Vintage, if you will. But on the other side of the battlefield, Samuele Tombesi playing Sultai Elves. And the cool thing about the Sultai Elves deck is that Samuele is playing a sort of a budget deck for Vintage. He's playing an unpowered deck. So it's pretty typical deck you might be seeing in Legacy, but it doesn't have any Moxes, it doesn't have Black Lotus. Instead, he's using 4 copies of Collector Oof, who is in the deck to try to shut down the fast mana cards from his opponent. So, Andreas, how do you think this matchup typically goes? On which side of the matchup would you rather sit?
I'm actually pretty silently optimistic for Samuel's ability to take these stock blue-black pair decks by storm and do a trick on them, especially because of the card you just mentioned. Like, you have Collector Roof to level the playing field. Then you have an annoying card like Allosaurus Shepherd, which now hits the bin, but it would have made all of his other green spells uncounterable. I think he has a lot of good tools to do well, funnily enough, even though it's unpowered.
Wow. So turn 1, Allosaurus Shepherd gets sniped by Orcish Bowmaster. That can feel too great for Samuela. We saw a match earlier where an elf that got destroyed by Fire and Ice. Samuela here with a turn 2 Deathrite Shaman. Another thing I can share about Samuela's deck that is very interesting is that he's running 4 Force of Vigor. So 4 main deck Collector Roof, 4 Force of Vigor. This should tell you a lot about Vintage as a format. There's just so much fast mana and so many different kinds of artifacts that you're using at the start of the game to get ahead on mana. That Samuela is basically running 8 what would normally be a sideboard card in a format like Legacy or Modern.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good call, but that's also what you have to do if you're coming here playing without no power. You kind of have to metagame the format a little bit. Also, I'm not sure why the Deathrite got exiled from the Force of Will, but
yeah. So, how does this Lurus control deck typically work? It's a fair blue deck. What's
yep.
your end game? How do you typically win the game with a deck like that?
Yeah, so most of the time it's just thanks to constructs from Ursa Saga, backed up by some orcs in various forms. But you just saw Time Vault hit the battlefield, so now that means that Manifold Key will combine with that card and take infinite turns should it see the light of day. So you have the ability to win
Ooh, wow.
out of nowhere, and you have the ability to slowly grind your opponent out.
Wow. So Stefan naturally drawing that Time Vault already puts it into play on turn 2. Now he does have the Ursa Saga, like you mentioned. He can get a Manifold Key out of his deck 2 turns from now. There's also Lurus to make sure he can rebuy those cards from the graveyard should something happen to them. And that puts Samuela in a little bit of trouble, but we do know that he is running 4 Collector's Oof and Force of Vigor, so certainly still not all over.
Collector Roof is definitely the tool he's looking for here. It all even stops the beatdown from the orcs. But Luris is also something to worry about if the game goes longer. Then Stefan can start making bad attacks with Bowmasters and replaying it to finish off the Collector Roof and stuff like that. So yeah, this is a tough one.
That's a great point, actually, about the Bowmasters potentially coming back from the graveyard. One question I have for you is, if you think about Vintage, what are some other budget decks that you could run? Like now we see some well at 3 and 1, with a deck without power, right? Are there any other decks like that in the format that typically do not use power or do not have to use power to be competitive?
It's so budget will be a relative word here, I would say, but Bazaar's Baghdad strategies doesn't run power. So if you can get the 4 Bazaars down, the rest should be pretty easy on the wallet. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say there's any like super cheap vintage deck that I recommend running in to a tournament without power. But Samuel is here to prove me otherwise. I should say.
So in the meantime, Samuel Gas, a once upon a time, gets Orcish Bowmasters, kills Stefan's Bowmasters, and also uses a Boseiju to deal with that Urza Saga, recognizing that if it stays in play for too long, Stefan would be able to get that Manifold Key and would be able to get infinite turns. Speaking of budget decks, is Fish, our Merfolk, still a thing
Oh,
in Vintage?
yeah, this says a lot about when you last played a vintage tournament. But I like I love the question, and I remember that as a kid, like Fish would be this combination of like fast creatures, a little bit of disruption, maybe, and then you had like free counter spells to back it up. But yeah, these days we have somewhat similar decks, some Sultai decks with Deathrite Shaman, Collector Oof, Leobold with Daze and Force of Will. So the Fish decks just got better, and I guess you can even make an argument that Dimir Control is 2023 Blue Black Fish.
Right, just the cards got a little bit more powerful in the meantime.
Definitely.
All right, Stefan with a Wasteland here. Lurus, I think, is still in his hand. 2 more cards. Decides to tap the Wasteland. Believe that is a Soul Ring from the new
Yeah,
set.
it definitely is a Soul Ring. I played against Stefan. He actually eliminated me from this event. So yeah, that is a Soul Ring.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, that's the difference between Vintage and Legacy. In Legacy, you do need to have a good reason to run cards like Mox Diamond or Chrome Mox. In Vintage, everybody has access to the fast mana. All these Moxes, Soul Ring, uh, Mana Vault, Black
Mana
Lotus,
Crypt. Yeah.
Mana Crypt, all that fast mana appears in pretty much every deck because there is very little cost associated to it, to actually putting that in your deck. So what does Samuela have here? 2 1/1s. He does have 2 black creatures, so keep in mind that Natural Order requires you to sacrifice a green creature. I do see a Natural Order in his hand, but currently not castable. Cast an Elvish Reclaimer. I think that's a Gaia's Cradle on the battlefield. So with that
It
Reclaimer,
is.
he would potentially be able to fire off that Natural Order.
Yeah, this could get interesting. Let's see what Samuel does, because we know about the natural order. Stefan only has 1 unknown card, so your time to go for it, in my opinion.
And that is a Force of Will. So Stefan naturally tapping 5 mana, using that Soul Ring to generate 5. Hard counters the Natural Order. I think that was sort of a giveaway when he decided not to cast Dolores the turn before against a deck that has very little interaction. But I think I like Samuela casting the Natural Order anyway. Just make you have it. If you have it, sure. If you don't, well, I might as well be winning the game on the spot, getting my trucks or something along those lines.
Yeah, I like that line of, especially because we're 2 guys, both 3 and 1. They're obviously both very competent at Magic, so just passing the turn there with 5 mana could be a giveaway, as you say, but also like a very good bluff to delay your opponent's game plan. So I like how both players played that sequence as well.
All right, so Stefan plays his Lurus, gets back the Orcish Bowmasters, attacks Samuela down to 13, and uses that Wasteland crucially to also deal with the Gaia's Cradle. So this sets Samuela back quite a bit, who's now sitting on only 2 lands and an Orc token, staring down a potential infinite turns combo along with Lurus and Orcish Bowmasters. Not a great situation. What outs does Samuela have in a spot like this? Just draw a bunch of green creatures, Gaia's Cradle and cast a natural order for Craterhoof Behemoth?
Yeah. First, I would guess it has something to do with Bowmasters presenting two bodies, another Cradle and another natural order. That's a good call for something that potentially could get him out of the game. Also, I need to double check which targets he's running. I think he has a Craterhoof for sure, but I don't know if he has an Atraxa on top of it. Yeah, I just confirmed he has an Atraxa in his deck list on top of it. So if he has a lot of bodies in play, he can swing for lethal with Craterhoof. But if he is low on resources, the Atraxa can do some work.
Wow, repeal? What is this 2015 bouncing one of Samuel's permanents, drawing Stefan a card. There is a Mishra's Bubble. Take a look at your top card. We're going to be able to rebuy that with Lurus. Attack for 6 damage coming through. Put Samuela to 7. Yeah, the situation is getting worse and worse for Samuela. Also, playing a deck that doesn't really have any card selection, usually at the mercy of the top of his own deck.
Yeah, the only selection available to him is the Once Upon a Time, but that's no Ancestor Recall.
All right, draws for his turn. There's an Allosaurus Shepherd, 1 card left in hand. That's an Elvish Reclaimer. So 3 creatures in play. Funnily enough, the Reclaimer being a 3/4 is currently the biggest creature on the battlefield. So
Welcome to Vintage.
that should stabilize the board. But as you mentioned, Stefan does have the play available of attacking with that Orcish Bowmasters. And if Samuela blocks, he's going to be able to rebuy it back with the Lurus ability. He sees the play, decides to take 1 instead. They shortcut the Mishra's Bubble from the graveyard a little bit. Stefan, using the Lurus ability, casts the Mishra's Bubble, takes a look at Samuela's top card, draws a card next turn.
Yeah, this is definitely a terrible situation for Samuel. Um, as you mentioned, the attack with the Bowmasters, you kind of have to take it. If you don't, then the Bowmasters can be replayed, kill the Shepherd, and reduce Samuel's board even more. And since Gaia's Cradle is a part of like how you get back into this game, you just have to bullet and take the damage.
Brainstorm being cast. I think I see an Urza Saga that is potentially an infinite combo with that with a Time Vault in play. There's also a Spell Pierce and a Mental Misstep.
I'm thinking that card must be another card than Ursa Saga, though, with him playing the Misty out.
Right, that would make more sense to try to just put that into
It is a
play. Okay.
Bowmaster. I think it's a Bowmaster.
Okay. So interesting situation now. You could send the Lurus into a 3/4. Your opponent's obviously going to be thinking, well, why are you attacking, your 3/2 into my 3/4? This is not limited. I'm not expecting you to have cards like Giant Growth. So I think Samuela would piece that together very quickly that there's an Orcish Bowmasters potentially waiting. Looks like Stefan is valuing having Lurus in play, which certainly makes sense to me. Sense in both other creatures.
So here, the Bowmasters is really showcasing its utility. So you make it so that your previous 2/2 now trades with your opponent's 3/4, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great play. That is sort of a pump effect to make the orcs a little bit bigger
Yeah,
and
that's the
finish off
combat
the
trick we have in
reclaimer.
Vintage.
It looks like the card that Samuela has on the battlefield with that glare is actually a wasteland. So that might have been the reason why he put the Urza Saga on the top of his own deck
Okay,
instead
that
of
makes a ton
trying
of
to go
sense.
for the kill.
Oh, he put it back. I see. Yeah, that could make sense. There's the cradle we talked about being at least the first part of Samuel's comeback
Potential,
arc.
potential comeback. Yeah, so the Reclaimer ends up trading for the Orc token, gets a Gaia's Cradle for Samuela on the way out. Yeah, Lura's really doing a ton of work here, rebuying the Bowmasters. If there's nothing to shoot, then Stefan can just keep replaying the Mishra's Bauble every turn, which also gives him perfect information about what Samuel is about to do.
Yeah, definitely. I want to see a lethal ancestral recall targeting your opponent here in Stefan's spot.
With the Bowmasters in play. Yeah, that's actually
Yeah,
that's actually something that doesn't come up very often, especially in Legacy where you only brainstorm yourself. But yeah, that is certainly something that could come up, and that would make for a very funny ending to the
I've
game.
tried casting with Hullbreacher out, casting ancestral recall on my opponent to like ritual out a hardcasted Sphinx of the Steel Wind. That's
Wow.
also in the same ballpark of coolness, I would say.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So Samuela draws a card. He does have what 4 mana available right now. He does have a green creature, so if he does have a natural order, he can sacrifice the shepherd. Okay, floating 3. Is that Grist? It
That is a
is.
grist.
So that's interesting. He can now use Grist to buy himself a little bit of more time. He could also try to use Grist to deal with that Lurus. But he also needs some blockers because he's only at 3 life here. Stefan very quickly drawing. I think there was an Urza Saga on the top of his deck, but I think there is still a Wasteland for Samuela. Both creatures attacking
Double
Grist.
attacking, yeah.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. You want to get that Planeswalker off of the battlefield before it starts making more tokens.
Yeah, if you can't close out the game this turn, getting rid of the Planeswalker is very, very often the best play.
Ooh, a Fatal Push. You don't get to see 2 direct removal spells in Vintage because most decks revolve around non-creature spells and different kinds of combos. Stefan sends both of the creatures in. Samuela flashes in and Orcish Bowmasters, but Stefan is ready with a Force of Will. And that is it. Picks up game number 1. We're going to move to sideboarding. And unfortunately, I think Melee is giving us a little bit of issue. So we don't have the deck list ready on the screen, but we can tell you what the players have in the sideboard. So, Andreas, I'm looking at the Sultai Elves list at the sideboard. I'm seeing 4 Leyline, 3 Endurance, 3 Mindbreak Trap, a Position Agent, Bajuka Bog, Grist, and a Mental Misstep. Any of these cards look like something you would like to bring in a matchup like this?
It's actually interesting because Samuel can take it in multiple directions here. He can say 3/4 seems like great stats on a creature to win in a fair game. I want endurance, and also even the uh, teasing the Lurus graveyard value a little bit in the process. That could be something. Then he could be thinking, oh, Grist is kind of cool. My opponent has a lot of 1/1, so the insects are pretty strong for a longer game. But also a card like Opposition Agent, because your opponent has Urza's Saga, a couple of fetches, and Lauren Revealed. So that's some disruptive anti-shuffle card, even on top of the tutors. And I think the misstep is also gonna come in because Stefan should have access to maybe like 3 spot removals at 1 mana. So, but also with a deck like this, when you play Gaia's Cradle, you can't tamper too much with your deck to just lose consistency in the like having cheap creatures, Cradle, and a big play. There's also he might not like the natural order plan because he might not have confidence it's going to work. So there's a bunch of directions he can go here depending on how he views the matchup, I would say.
Looking at Stefan's sideboard, I see a couple copies of Pithing Needle, Mindbreak Trap. There is a Soul Rend, Snuff Out, Fatal Push. So some removal spells. Lurus, obviously, as the companion. I see a Gravedigger's Cage, Harkle's Recall, the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, and a Soul Guide Lantern. Any of these cards?
Yeah, so I
Something that
obviously like this the spot removal. Speaking of Vintage not having that many creatures and thus not that much removal, Stefan's sideboard has 6 spot removal, out of which 4 will work against this Sultai deck. Um, 2 snuff outs, those are good. It doesn't kill Deathray Shaman, that's worth noting, but it does kill a lot of stuff in the matchup, and then the fatal pushes are just super great. He can consider Grafdigger's Cage as a way to shut down Natural Order for good, but yeah, I'm not sure if he's willing to go that deep.
All right, game number 2. Samuel is starting with a free Once Upon a Time, gets himself a Deathrite Shaman. Turn 1, Stefan answers with a turn 1 Wasteland, doesn't use it. Is there any way you can read into that? Like, is that just because
So
you value your own mana development more than trying to set your opponent back by a land if they already have a Deathrite Shaman in play?
yeah, this will be fairly obvious from what happened now on screen. So Lauren revealed the inclusion of that card in the vintage format allows you to play like what Wasteland Go and keep a hand without blue mana initially. So that's just a way to bridge from 1 mana to 2 mana, so you can play your Bowmasters or whatever. So Wasteland Pass is not necessarily a super weak play like it would have been previously. Lauren reveal changes everything in that department.
All right, Stefan does exactly what you are talking about. Cycles that Lens cycles that Lorien revealed, gets himself an underground sea. And there is a snuff out also you talked about. Interestingly, as you mentioned, unable here to kill that Deathrite Shaman. So there's kind of a setback. As I'm not sure he wants to use that on a shepherd here. Keep in mind that natural order requires you to sacrifice a creature when you cast a spell as part of the cost. So you wouldn't be able to respond with a removal spell. So that's not something that is gonna work in a situation like this. Stefan decides to
Yes.
go.
So
Mhm.
yeah, so small correction. I said it can't kill Deathrite because Deathrite is also black. So actually, Shepherd here. Snuff out is non-sure. So only option available is killing the Shepherd, which also makes a ton of sense. Not that many lands look in the graveyards, it looks like. So Deathrite isn't too useful at the moment.
Wow, there's the collector oof, something we mentioned as a 4-off in Samuela's deck, turning off all the fast mana. Obviously, Stefan, this game didn't have any Moxes, doesn't have a Black Lotus, none of that funny business, no artifact shenanigans. So right now it looks like a 2 mana 2/2, but we do know that Urza Saga and the infinite turns combo with Time Vault is a big part
Yep.
of Stefan's deck.
Yeah, definitely. Collector Roof is a card that sometimes you play it into a board like this, and you don't really know the true value of the card unless you're working on coverage with open hands. But over the course of the game, the card will have a lot of impact if left unanswered.
Stefan responds with a Brainstorm, puts 2 cards back, says that Collector Oof resolves. Can't be too happy about it. Takes 2 more damage from the Death Rides and Lens cycles another Lorien revealed, getting himself most likely another Underground Sea. One thing I wanted to ask you is I see a Pithing Needle in Stefan's sideboard. Given that the Elves decks typically play the Elvish Reclaimer, is that something you might consider bringing that in, especially because you have Urza Saga, or is that too narrow? And is that just going to feel like a mulligan in some of the times where you're just being attacked by a Craterhoof Behemoth?
Yeah, great question. So the green deck will have a lot of cards. Like you can even needle Deathrite Shaman. It's not a mana ability. So you can needle Deathrite Shaman. That's somewhat useful. You can needle Reclaimer, as you said, and you can also needle the Allosaurus Shepherd. The Shepherd has a 6 mana activated ability that basically makes all of your elves like super big. So it has a lot of utility. But I'm also curious what you would bring out to fit a sideboard plan of 2 Fatal Push, 2 Snuff Out, and even needles on top of that. So I'm a bit worried about diluting my own deck too much. But yeah, it has utility against the deck.
All right, that certainly makes sense to me as well. Demonic Tutor being played by Stefan. I didn't quite catch what card he got into his hand. It looked a little bit like Library of Alexandria to me, but I don't think that is a card that Stefan is running.
Now, that card has fallen a bit out of favor, especially thanks to the average speed of the vintage format.
Oh, it was a land
But
though. Wow, the
yeah,
Tabernacle. Oh my god, this is brutal. So Samuela has to decide which 2 creatures to keep in his upkeep. He has to pay 1 mana for every creature. decides to keep the Oof and the Deathrite Shaman, keeping Tugish in play, attacking for 3 and no third land. So Samuela is in a bit of a log here, and to make things even worse, Wasteland does. Oh my god!
Wow.
Oh my god, that is absolutely brutal. So no lands there for Samuela, which means no creatures in his upkeep, and that pretty much logs him out of the game, right?
Yeah, this is just a great example of build your own Wrath of God, like Tabernacle and double Wasteland. That's awesome. But, by the way, now there's lands in the yard, so the Deathrite can keep itself alive. But yeah, not the most scary situation for Stefan.
Wow. Is this what it feels like playing creatures in Vintage?
I wouldn't say so. This is like the absolute worst case scenario for it. But yeah, it was a very clever. I think that Tabernacle is even it's a one of in Stefan's sideboard. So he likes the utility for situations like this, and especially when pairing it with Wasteland, you can do some very nasty things.
And this also really nicely showcases you the power of all these tutor effects in the format, like demonic tutor, all the other card selection spells that help you get these special one-offs. Like you mentioned, Tabernacle is a one-off in Stefan's sideboard, and here it can basically completely win him the game by locking Samuela out of the game, thanks to also destroying all of his lands in the process.
Yeah, definitely. Having a format with a lot of cantrips and tutors, that makes deck building so interesting. Where your one-offs will have more impact on average than other formats. So I like that aspect as well. You can really stretch your sideboard.
All right, so this is the fair plan of this blue fair deck. I'm gonna make fair. All things considered, this is as fair as it gets in Vintage. Stefan just makes some constructs now with Urza Saga.
Yeah, I'm curious of the timing of this Force of Vigor. Maybe the players are discussing that as well.
Force pitching and a mental misstep. So in a lot of situations, you would probably want to keep your force for something more threatening. But in this situation, I think both players can probably see the writing on the wall. Samuel in a terrible situation with that Deathrite Shaman, basically keeping itself alive, just so he doesn't die with that Tabernacle in play. Stefan with think another Urza Saga there in hand.
It sure looks like a second copy, and now he's trying to decide what to tutor up with his Chapter 3 trigger from the saga. Sol Ring is the choice here.
Yeah, there's just so much fast mana in Vintage, and Urza Saga is making that even worse sometimes for the opponents. What would you say are the top 5 cards in Vintage? And you have 10 seconds.
I mean, I'm going to exclude the Power 9, so I'm going to go for like format-defining cards. I'm going to go for Force of Vigor, like free interactive stuff against a lot of things. And I'm going to go for Urza's Saga. Can just win any game if left unchecked. Then I should probably say something like Hollow One that really revolutionized Bizarre decks. And yeah, maybe something like Wasteland. I think that's a sure bet. You even see it in the saga decks themselves now. For the fifth one, I'm not really too sure. Lauren revealed probably. That also revolutionized like mana bases, blue counts out of a lot of decks. So yeah, those 5.
Samuel draws another card. Landlocked there with the Tabernacle, only with a copy of Gaia's Cradle in play that doesn't give him any mana. 2-0 for Samuele. Moving on to 4-1. I'm pretty happy we did get to feature a match between a fully powered deck with all these broken cards from the entire 30 years of Magic history, playing against an unpowered deck, a deck you can run in Legacy, featuring four Force of Vigors and four Collector Oof to try to fight against that. I think this is gonna be the end of round 5, unless we have any backup feature matches. I don't think we do. So we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and we're gonna be back right away in a couple of minutes with round number 6. So don't go anywhere. We're gonna be right back.